In the summer of 1546, a young woman was carried to her execution, unable to walk after enduring brutal torture. Askew had withstood something nearly unthinkable. A woman of noble birth, subjected to the rack and instrument of torment, typically reserved for common criminals. Despite her dislocated joints and unimaginable suffering, she refused to expose those who shared her Protestant beliefs. Her ordeal stands as one of the most harrowing illustrations of religious persecution in Tudor England, where following one's conscience could mean paying the ultimate price, and where the machinery of state repression operated with relentless precision. Askew lived during a time when your faith could decide your fate. Yet the England she grew up in was far more complicated than a simple Catholic versus Protestant divide. Born around 1521 into an affluent family in Lincolnshire, Anne matured during the chaos of the Protestant Reformation. King Henry VIII had severed ties with the Roman Catholic Church, declaring himself the head of the Church of England. But religious doctrine remained dangerously ambiguous. The king's own beliefs shifted constantly, leaving even the devout unsure which creeds were permissible from one day to the next. Catholic influence still dominated parts of the royal court, while reformists pushed for sweeping changes that would dismantle long-standing religious traditions. Navigating religion in Tudor England was like crossing a battlefield littered with unseen traps. Henry's break from Rome created a theological vacuum, quickly filled by rival groups, each claiming to represent true Christianity. The 1539 Act of 6 Articles reinforced many Catholic doctrines while maintaining the king's authority over the papacy. This resulted in a strange fusion of beliefs that pleased neither conservative Catholics nor zealous Protestants, leaving many confused about which beliefs led to heaven and which to the stake. Anne possessed a rare and dangerous combination for a woman in Tudor England: deep intellect and unwavering faith. Unlike most women of her time, she was literate in Latin and well-versed in scripturian education encouraged by her father, who believed it proper for a woman of her status. When he arranged her marriage to Thomas Kim, a Catholic who rejected her religious ideas, Anne found herself caught between social obligation and personal belief. Their union quickly unraveled as theological disputes replaced domestic peace. Although she bore 2 children, Anne made a radical decision that stunned Tudor society. She left her family to follow her spiritual convictions in London. This act of defiance would ultimately lead to her death, but it underscored the strength of her dedication. Her choice to forsake her household was virtually unheard of in Tudor England, where women were expected to adhere to their husband's faith. The law offered no refuge for a woman who prioritized religious conviction over marital duty. By abandoning Thomas Kim, Anne relinquished all legal rights to her children. Stripped of most of her possessions, Anne effectively became a religious exile within her own homeland. Her choices defied not only Catholic theology, but also the societal structure that enforced male dominance over women. This defiance of traditional gender roles intensified her persecution, as authorities began to view her as a dual threat to religious orthodoxy and to the patriarchal order. Within the clandestine Protestant community in London, Anne swiftly earned a reputation as a skilled theologian and impassioned preacher. She engaged in scriptural debates with educated men and wasn't hesitant to openly dispute Catholic teachings. Her surviving writings reveal a brilliant mind and steadfast dedication to Protestant ideology. She dismissed the concept of transubstantiation, questioned the authority of priests to absolve sins, and rejected the veneration of saints. While these views are common among modern Protestants, in Tudor England, they were considered blasphemous and punishable by death. Anne's articulate and fervent voice attracted supporters but also placed her under the surveillance of authorities, increasingly wary of religious dissidents. London's Protestant underground was a perilous world of covert gatherings, smuggled texts, and secret codes. Anne moved through this network with notable daring, attending hidden worship services and distributing banned writings. She maintained correspondence with reformers throughout England and the continent, inadvertently leaving behind evidence that would later be used against her. Her home became a haven for fellow believers, a space where suppressed ideas could be spoken freely. But this visibility would be her undoing, as government informants steadily infiltrated the Protestant community. Her downfall began in 1545, when she was initially detained on charges of heresy. The accusations were grave-spreading illicit books and preaching forbidden doctrines. Yet the case was constructed carefully, probing the boundaries of royal favor. Her ties to influential Protestants, including Queen Catherine Parr's sister-in-law, initially secured her release after interrogation. But the authorities remained unconvinced. They believed Anne was the linchpin in a broader Protestant conspiracy that threatened the dominance of the Catholic-aligned faction at court. What they sought were namesand. They were convinced Anne held them. Anne's persecution cannot be fully understood without recognizing its political context. By 1546, Henry VIII was a volatile monarch, and rival factions were jockeying for influence ahead of his inevitable death. The Catholic Party, fronted by figures like Stephen Gardiner and Thomas Wriothesley, saw a chance to eradicate their Protestant adversaries by implicating them in heresy. If they could link Queen Catherine Parr herself to subversive theology, they could dismantle the Protestant cause and secure control of Prince Edward's succession. Her second arrest, in June 1546, signaled the start of a harrowing ordeal that would shock even veteran Tudor officials. Imprisoned in the Tower of London, Anne was interrogated by some of the realm's most powerful figures, including Lord Chancellor Wriothesley and Sir Richard Rich. These were not overtly cruel men by contemporary standards, but they were shrewd and relentless. These officials viewed Anne not as a person, but as a stepping stone to their political objectives. They demanded she divulge the identities of fellow Protestants, particularly those within Queen Catherine Parr's circle. The stakes could not have been higher if they could tie the Queen herself to heretical beliefs. They could dismantle the entire Protestant faction and reshape the future of England's religious order. The methods used to extract information from Anne were both intellectually shrewd and physically cruel. Her interrogators were scholars as well as politicians, capable of engaging her in prolonged theological debates, hoping to catch her in contradictions. They alternated between threats and incentives, offering her release if she cooperated, and painting horrifying images of what would follow if she remained silent. Friends who had already confessed were brought in, their presence meant to pressure her into submission. When these psychological tactics failed, they escalated to physical manipulation, depriving her of sleep and food to wear down her resilience. Still, Anne would not yield. This led to an unprecedented and shocking decision. For the first time in English history, a noblewoman would be subjected to the rack. Such a measure defied the deeply entrenched norms of social hierarchy and required direct approval from the highest authorities. Traditionally, the rack was used only on criminals of lower status traitors or common offenders, not those of noble blood. But Anne's unwavering silence had left her captors desperate. They were prepared to violate centuries of legal and social precedent to extract what they needed, fully aware that the image of a tortured noblewoman would resonate and terrify across the realm. This choice to torture Anne wasn't a rash act of rage, but a coldly calculated political move. Her interrogators knew that tales of her suffering would ripple through Protestant circles, possibly deterring others from defiance. They also assumed that, being a woman, she would break under extreme pain and assumption that gravely underestimated her strength. Authorization for such brutality came directly from the king himself, underscoring just how pivotal her case had become in the religious and political tug-of-war of the time. The torture chamber in the Tower of London was engineered to annihilate both body and spirit. The racker frame with rollers and hand cranks stretched the body past its limits, inducing agonizing dislocations. The environment itself was intimidating, filled with grim instruments of pain displayed to amplify psychological fear. Long before the first touch, as Anne was secured to the apparatus, she would have seen the cruel mechanics prepared to rip her body apart. The mental torment began even before the physical dread, the anticipation, the realization of inevitable destruction. And still, even in the face of such horror, Anne held firm. She did not surrender. The rack functioned on a grim yet straightforward principle. The methodical and unrelenting extension of the human frame passed its natural threshold. The victim was placed flat on their back, wrists and ankles strapped to rollers fixed at either end of a wooden structure. As the handles were turned, the rollers spun in opposing directions, stretching the body tighter and tighter. What began as mere discomfort soon escalated to unbearable pain, finally reaching a horrifying crescendo as joints tore from their sockets. The procedure could be paused and resumed, allowing the torturers to switch between pain and interrogation. The victim remained fully conscious, forced to endure not only searing agony, but also the constant dread of its resumption. What happened next astonished even the most seasoned Tudor interrogators. As the rack methodically tore Anne's jointure shoulders, hips, and limbs from their sockets, she remained resolute. The torment defies description. Imagine every connection in your body being violently pulled apart while you remain awake. Eyewitnesses later recalled that the pain inflicted was so gruesome that Wriothesley himself took over the task. When the professional torturer refused to continue, the tower's own executioner, hardened by years of blood and punishment, was reportedly so horrified by the command to torture a woman that he resigned his post rather than participate. Anne's physical suffering was immense, but the psychological toll on her tormentors was equally profound. Wriothesley, no stranger to Tudor brutality, resorted to personally turning the rack in a last-ditch effort to shatter her resistance. Sir Richard Rich, long seasoned in interrogations and executions, was said to be visibly shaken by Anne's unyielding silence. These were men who had broken countless individuals, yet before Anne, their proven methods failed. Her quiet endurance rattled their confidence in their own strategies, and even their grasp of human nature. Court records chillingly documented the technical details of her ordeal. The torture was carried out in phases, intense periods of stretching, punctuated by brief moments of partial release, allowing circulation to return to crushed limbs. This pattern was designed to intensify suffering while keeping her conscious, denying her even the mercy of fainting. Between sessions, Anne was returned to her cell, forced to remain still as her swollen joints and cramping muscles throbbed with pain. Each moment served as a relentless reminder of what awaited her if she continued to resist. The condition of her body in the aftermath revealed the full cost of her defiance. Anne was so badly injured that she could no longer support herself. Her arms dangled helplessly, her legs rendered useless. In an era without anesthesia or real medical care, she endured a level of torment that could have easily driven someone to madness. Yet her mind remained intact, and her faith unbroken. From her prison cell, she continued to compose verses some of the most stirring spiritual poetry of the Tudor period. Smuggled out of the Tower, her writings became a source of strength for other Protestants, a lasting testament to a spirit that refused to be crushed. The writings Anne produced from the Tower portrayed a woman transformed by suffering, yet not defeated by it. Her poetry conveyed the torment of her physical condition, but also revealed a profound spiritual victory, a body broken, but a soul untouched. She described divine conversations in her solitary cell and visions that carried her through moments of despair. These writings, quietly passed among Protestant supporters, became potent tools of Reformation propaganda. They illustrated that even the harshest oppression could not extinguish genuine belief that spiritual conviction could outlast even the most brutal physical torment. The legal process that ensued was a shame engineered to give a veneer of justice to an outcome already decided. Anne was convicted of heresy, formally, for her religious writings and declarations. But her true offense, in the eyes of her interrogators, was her refusal to betray others. The trial was short, its result predetermined, and held in a chamber where Anne had to be physically supported due to her inability to sit up straight. The verdict was grim. She was to be burned at the stake, the standard punishment for heretics. For many, this sentence would have been horror enough, but Anne's suffering was compounded by the condition of her body, mangled from torture. She would meet the flames not standing, but broken. The sentencing was attended by some of the highest-ranking officials in the kingdom, turning what should have been a routine condemnation into a carefully staged public spectacle. The same men who had sanctioned her torture were the ones delivering the verdict, merging the roles of accuser, executioner, and judge into one. Her inability to rise or stand during the trial was a stark image of the state's capacity to annihilate dissent. As she slumped in her chair, her dislocated limbs unable to support her, the sentence was pronounced. The days leading to her execution were filled with continued efforts to shatter her resolve. Clergy visited daily, promising eternal salvation if she would confess and recant. State agents tempted her with clemency in exchange for just one name. Even her estranged husband was summoned, hoping familial bonds might succeed where physical torment had failed. Still, Anne would not waver. Instead of yielding, she used these visits as opportunities to affirm her beliefs. Her refusal to bend in the face of such pressure astonished even those who sought her downfall and who had assumed that torture combined with glimmers of hope would inevitably break her will. On the 16th of July, 1546, the final chapter of Anne's ordeal began. Too crippled to walk, she was carried to Smithfield, London's notorious execution ground. Seated in a chair, the procession through the capital streets was unlike any heresy execution that had come before. Typically, condemned heretics walked to their deathsome recanting along the way to ease their fate. Anne's broken body, however, made such a path impossible. Anne's chair became an impromptu pulpit from which she continued to proclaim her faith. Her voice resonating among the crowd, gathered not to revel in the demise of a heretic, but to witness the final stand of a woman whose bravery had become the stuff of legend. The assembly at Smithfield that day was unlike most. Normally, executions of heretics drew rowdy onlookers who viewed the burnings as divine justice. But Anne's death attracted a more solemn audience, many of whom were covert Protestant sympathizers come to bear witness to her final hours. Even some of her adversaries acknowledged her incredible courage, with a few Catholic observers quietly questioning the righteousness of her fate. Authorities had stationed additional guards around the site, concerned that Anne's supporters might attempt to rescue, or that the emotional tension in the crowd could erupt into unrest. The execution ground had been meticulously arranged to maximize both fear and spectacle. The stake was placed for optimal viewing, with clear sightlines to ensure as many people as possible could see the punishment unfold. Wood was arranged to burn quickly and intensely, ensuring a swift, consuming blaze. But for Anne, even these calculated details took on a macabre tone. Because she was too broken to stand, her body had to be hoisted from the chair and tied securely to the stake with added restraints to prevent her from collapsing prematurely into the fire. By Tudor standards, the execution was intended to be merciful, though in this context, mercy was a gruesome concept. Small bags of gunpowder were strapped to her body, designed to explode and hasten death. Such kindness was usually reserved for those who had recanted or were protected by influential allies. However, even this intended mercy added to the horror. The gunpowder would rupture her already devastated body, and yet she would remain conscious during the blasts. The explosive charges were carefully positioned to ensure lethality, not just injury, a grim detail that underscores the clinical precision of Tudor executions. As the fire crept upward, Anne Askew faced her end with the same strength that had defined her struggle. Eyewitnesses later recalled that she remained conscious longer than most, her lips moving in what many believed to be prayer, even as the flames consumed her garments and began to scorch her flesh. When the gunpowder finally ignited, the explosions were so powerful that burning fragments scattered across the crowd, forcing many to step back. And yet, even these blasts did not bring immediate release. Contemporary observers wrote of her continued movement after the first detonations. In the hours that followed, Anne's death sent shockwaves through the capital. While the state declared victory over heresy, many Londoners left Smithfield in eerie silence, deeply unsettled by what they had seen. Stories of her steadfastness and the cruelty she endured spread quickly. Protestant supporters began preserving her writings, determined that her memory would not perish with her body. Even among Catholics, there were those who quietly questioned the morality of torturing and executing a woman whose only offense was her unwavering faith. The shockwaves from Anne's death extended far beyond the scaffold at Smithfield. News of her ordeal spread rapidly across Protestant Europe, where it was seen as undeniable proof of Catholic cruelty and authoritarianism in England. Her writings, safeguarded and published posthumously, became a source of inspiration for reformers who viewed her as living evidence that steadfast belief could withstand the worst that human cruelty had to offer. The fact that she, a noblewoman, had been subjected to torture, a shocking departure from precedent, was seized upon by Protestant propagandists. Her story became emblematic of the extreme lengths to which religious authorities would go to silence dissent. Protestant historians, especially John Foxe in his Book of Martyrs, ensured that Anne's legacy was woven into the very fabric of English Protestant identity. Her testimony was read aloud in churches, emboldening believers to hold fast to their convictions in the face of persecution. The contrast between her dignity and the savagery of her captors became a compelling tool of persuasion that shaped religious consciousness for generations. Her legacy carried significant weight in the New World as well. Among Puritan communities in the American colonies, Anne was revered as a symbol of defiance against religious oppression. The international reaction to her execution was swift and scathing. Protestant monarchs across Europe denounced the torture of a noblewoman as a disgraceful breach of Christian values and aristocratic code. Even the Holy Roman Emperor, despite his own role in persecuting Protestants, criticized England's treatment of Anne as excessive and politically damaging. French Protestants used her martyrdom to highlight the perils of Catholic dominance, while theologians in Germany integrated her writings into their doctrinal debates. Anne's death became a diplomatic liability for England, tarnishing its image throughout Protestant Europe. Her story compels us to examine disturbing truths about human behavior and the justifications people construct in the name of belief, both as those who suffer and those who inflict suffering. Her interrogators were not heartless monsters, but influential men who genuinely believed they were upholding national stability and religious order. In their minds, extracting information from Anne was a necessary act to prevent greater chaos. Figures like Wriothesley and Rich were well-educated, regular churchgoers who considered themselves pious men. Yet, in their fervor to defend their vision of religious truth, they committed acts so cruel that they horrified even their peers and continue to unsettle us centuries later. The institutional apparatus that facilitated Anne's torture shows how moral corruption can take root when personal accountability is surrendered to authority. Each participant in her ordeal could defer blame to superiors, creating a framework where no one bore direct responsibility. The guards who strapped her to the rack, the scribes who documented her agony, the judges who declared her fatal, were cogs in a system designed to dilute accountability to the point of invisibility. This dispersal of guilt enabled ordinary individuals to engage in unimaginable cruelty while still viewing themselves as righteous. The tactics used against Anna torture, execution by fire, and the intentional infliction of pain were not only legal, but widely accepted as instruments of governance in the 1500s. Her ordeal serves as a stark reminder of how recently in human history such acts were not just tolerated, but praised by those in power. The onlookers who crowded around public executions were not inherently cruel. They were fulfilling a societal expectation of witnessing what was deemed justice. This widespread acceptance of brutality highlights how easily a seemingly civilized culture can descend into savagery when fear and dogma eclipse empathy. The theological justifications used to validate Anne's treatment underscore the grave dangers of unwavering conviction in matters of faith. Both her executioners and her defenders believed they acted under divine command. In such a climate, middle ground vanished, and bloodshed became inevitable. The Catholic authorities who sanctioned her torture sincerely thought they were preserving moral order and saving souls. Anne, equally, believed her convictions were sacred and worth any suffering. This clash of uncompromising beliefs led to a tragedy that gained nothing and left deep wounds in England's religious history. Among the most disturbing aspects of Anne's persecution was the way her gender was weaponized against her. Torturing a woman of noble birth shattered prevailing norms of femininity and class. Ironically, those same norms were used to rationalize the decision. Her tormentors assumed her female body presumed more delicate than a man's would succumb more easily to torment. They also believed her instincts as a mother might compel her to talk in order to shield other women and children in her faith community. Their grave miscalculation revealed both a fundamental underestimation of human resilience and a cynical readiness to exploit what they perceived as female vulnerability. The legal maneuvers that allowed Anne's torture would set troubling precedents for centuries. Applying torture to a woman of high social status, criminalizing personal religious discussions, and accepting evidence gained through extreme coercion, all marked a break from long-held legal norms in England. Though framed as temporary measures to preserve national unity, these changes laid the groundwork for future abuses of power. Anne's case exposed how quickly legal safeguards could be dismantled when those in authority felt endangered. Her refusal to implicate other seven under unbearable torture forces us to confront difficult questions about our own moral limits. She had every reason to speak. The suffering was beyond comprehension. Her position was seemingly hopeless, and remaining silent only prolonged her torment. Those she protected weren't necessarily close companions, but fellow believers she had encountered in the Protestant underground. Still, she chose to safeguard their identities, paying for it with excruciating pain. Her decision forces us to confront deeply uncomfortable questions about loyalty, sacrifice, and the true cost of conscience. Even now, the psychological resilience that allowed Anne to endure such intense torment remains elusive. Contemporary studies on trauma and coercion indicate that most individuals capitulate under significantly less strain. Yet Anne held firm. Her silence in the face of extreme mental and physical suffering seems to have been fueled by a potent mix of spiritual belief, inner conviction, and perhaps a rare ability to mentally detach from physical anguish. Her writings imply that she viewed her pain not as meaningless torment, but as a spiritual communion with the suffering of Christ, a sacred ordeal that fortified her rather than broke her. This spiritual framework may have allowed her to reframe her torture as a divine trial, turning agony into endurance. The consequences of her silence were far-reaching. By withholding names, Anne shielded the Protestant circle around Queen Catherine Parr, allowing that movement to persist and eventually prevail under the reign of Edward VI. For her interrogators, the implications were devastating. They had staked considerable political credibility on extracting confessions from her, and they failed. Their inability to crush her resolve left them exposed to backlash, even among their own faction. Anne's unwavering defiance became a rallying point for Protestants and a lingering humiliation for their Catholic adversaries. Her steadfastness, preserved in the written word and public memory, transformed her from a condemned heretic into an enduring symbol of spiritual resistance and moral courage.